Welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. Another installment in our Bible study on what we're calling the Hall of Faith. This is the 9th installment. The Hall of Faith being this study of Old Testament men and women that were chosen as characters of faith by the author of the book of Hebrews. Hopefully that makes sense. The author of the book of Hebrews lists in chapter 11 many men and women from the Old Testament who had exhibited faith. So if you'll recall this list, we've been going through this list. We looked at Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and now we come to the next one at the bottom of the left column there. Because it was last week we did look at Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph together in one evening. So this week we're ready for another one of the heavyweights. I consider Moses a heavyweight, like Abraham. And there's a lot to cover when talking about Moses' faith. So I know it's going to take more than 1 week. In fact, I just called this part 1 on Moses. I'm going to use probably 3 weeks devoted to him. So recall that the writer of Hebrews begins chapter 11 by describing faith as this. Verse 1, now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. The ancients being the Old Testament characters. So we should be pretty familiar with this by now. Faith involves confidence, that being sure part, and conviction, that being certain part, and also trust in God. So we've seen that confidence, conviction, and trust in people so far that we've talked about. Today with Moses, we'll see that again. But we'll also see a direct reference to the following. How faith relates to the future. What we hope for, and how faith has as its object things we do not see. Coming from there. It's a little premature. What we hope for and what we do not see. Faith about the future and objects unseen. So what does the writer of Hebrews have to say about the faith of Moses? Or another way, why does the writer feel he is deserving to be an example of a man of faith? So now we get into it. This is in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. There's that he was confident or sure of things hoped for. By faith, he left Egypt. Not fearing the king's anger, he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. There's that he was certain of things which are not seen. By faith, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. All right, let's look at verse 24 and 25 again. We see that by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. Notice that second word, he chose. The original text was not capital letters, nor was it underlined, but it's very important to look at this, the choices, the choosing. Some of Moses' choices are going to be discussed here. And we are not going to cover the entire life of Moses. We're really going to look at what the author of Hebrews kind of centers on. If you look at the first 14 chapters of Exodus is about Moses. And you'll feel free to get all of his story there. So now these two verses, 24 and 25, are what we'll focus on in today's study. So by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated, etc., etc. So wait a minute. Moses has grown up, it says, and he's making some crazy choices. Who in their right mind would give up being the Pharaoh's grandson? That's what he was, the Pharaoh's grandson. How did Moses get to this point where he's known as the Pharaoh's daughter? He's the Pharaoh's daughter's son. So even if you know the story, I think it's worth examining again. Let's look at that story. And there we go to Exodus chapter 2. Now a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. So a spoiler alert is this hidden little boy is Moses. Notice that both parents were from the tribe of Levi, a Levi man and a Levite woman. That's the tribe God designated to be the priests. So Moses' parents, coming from the line of Levi, had this son Moses, and they hid him for 3 months. Now, why was it necessary to hide this baby boy? To answer that, we need to look at the chapter before, the chapter in Exodus chapter 1, starting with verse 6. Now Joseph and all his brothers, now that would be the 12 sons of Jacob. Remember how when we studied Joseph was in Egypt. After the famine, all of his brothers came and his father to live in Egypt. So that is the 12 sons of Jacob, also known as Israel, the brothers. So all that generation died, even though they died in Israel or in Egypt. Okay, verse 7, but the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt. Well, now there's something going on. As we'd expect, because it came from God, it was a promise of God to Abraham, it's going to be fulfilled. And that's what was going on. The number of descendants of Abraham is growing, as God said it would. It's happening here in Egypt, the land where Joseph was. So things start getting tense. Joseph gone, a new king comes along, a new Pharaoh, and he doesn't know about the significance of Joseph and his brothers. So let's read on. What's next? It's getting tense now. In verse 9, look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So what does the king do about this problem? This is where it gets bad, but it's what God predicted. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. So this was that capture, that 400 years of enslavement that God predicted. And there's more. They made their lives bitter with hard labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their hard labor, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly. But see, no matter what is thrown at them, they multiply. And next we read of some heroes of faith who don't really get mentioned, but should. They're kind of nameless folks, and that is the Hebrew midwives. So the king is going further to get rid of this Jewish menace. Right here in verse 15, the king of Egypt, that's the Pharaoh, said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. So, here's these midwives risking their lives for their people, for God's chosen people. So what happens next? Verse 18, then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. That was their reason. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. So apparently the midwives were spared. The story was believed, that they're vigorous Israelite women. God was kind to the midwives. The people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Now we come to this final edict from the Pharaoh in verse 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. This is what Moses' parents faced. You can bet if they were caught, it would be more than just the death of Moses. They would put their lives in jeopardy too. But it was important to save their boy. This is all in God's plan. All in God's plan. Now let's get back to Exodus chapter 2. Remember, with little baby Moses. This is why Mom and Dad had to hide them. So Moses' mother, hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. So you've no doubt heard the story. I remember as a little kid coloring a picture of baby Moses in the basket with reeds in the water. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrews' babies," she said. So Moses survived the king's edict for 3 months, thanks to brave parents of faith, and now the Pharaoh's daughter feels sorry for him. God's plan is still at work. Well, then in verse 7, then his sister, that'd be the baby sister, Moses' sister, asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered, and the girl went and got the baby's mother. It'd be her mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. That is how Pharaoh's grandson was Moses. He became the Pharaoh's daughter's son. She named him Moses, so he got his name then, saying, "I drew him out of the water." So not only is he spared, but who gets to raise him? His Hebrew parents. Surely he learned about the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Learned all of the importance of the one and true God of the chosen people. He must have been informed of Abraham's promises too, including that God's chosen people would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But the good news is also that they would be delivered. It doesn't say how old, but the baby gets the name Moses, as you saw, and the baby becomes the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. I can see time is going very quickly. Let's get back to this. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, this is back in Hebrews 11, and according to Stephen's account, Stephen from the New Testament, in Acts 7, Moses was 40 years old. He had grown up, he's 40 years old. He refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. So what was Moses' choice? I said earlier that Moses made choices. Well, here it is, one choice. A choice between being mistreated versus enjoying the pleasures of sin. And I see that we've already gone through about 15 minutes. I think we can go a little bit further here. We'll go into more detail about Moses' actions which led to this being mistreated and no longer being the privileged son. But let's focus on this one thing, his choice, what he was giving up. His choice was this. This 40-year-old man's choice was refusing the pleasures of sin, as it says there. And I like what a scholar named F.B. Meyer writes. I'm going to quote parts of what he says on what he did choose to give up. This is F.B. Meyer. What a magnificent land must Egypt have been in those days. The atmosphere was rainless. The Nile brought from afar the rich alluvial soil that bore corn enough to feed the world. The banks of the river were covered with cities, villages, stately temples, and all the evidences of an advanced civilization, whilst mighty pyramids and colossal figures towered to 100 feet in height. The cream of all this was poured into the cup of Moses. He was brought up in the palace and treated as the grandson of Pharaoh. If he rode forth into the streets, it would be in a princely equipage, amid the cries of "Bow the knee." If he floated on the Nile, it would be in a golden barge, amid the strains of voluptuous music. If he wished for anything, the almost illimitable wealth of the treasures of Egypt was within his reach. When old enough, he was probably sent to be educated in the college. There he would learn to read and write the mysterious hieroglyph. There, too, he would be instructed in mathematics, astronomy, and chemistry. But Moses was something more than a royal student, spending his years in cultured refinement and lettered ease. He was a statesman and a soldier. Josephus wrote that while he was still in his early manhood, the Ethiopians invaded Egypt and routed the army sent against them. Moses was entrusted with the command of the royal troops. He immediately took the field, surprised and defeated the enemy, captured their principal city, and returned to Egypt laden with the spoils of victory. Well, that was from F.B. Meyer. Moses had it all, and he's refusing the pleasures of sin. When we think of the pleasures of sin, we might often think of lust and excesses like drunkenness, etc. And I'm sure he had the possibility to do that. But the bigger picture, I think, is of he refusing the allure of materialism. He had everything at his fingertips. Refusing what would be considered success. So, success, and then also power. He was giving up being a golden boy. And that's where we're going to leave it. We'll talk next week about what his choice got him into. So in the meantime, you all take care, and may the Lord be with you.